Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and he's Stefan Biankowski, and we are also joined by Matt Ford. Matt, first of all, great to have you back. Coming quite a regular on this show. How are you doing?
I am very good, thank you. Yeah, survived a couple of days at Oktoberfest, and now back in the safety of the Rhineland, where no one's wearing silly outfits. Not yet.
You're not silly, Matt. You know where I'm from. That's like telling Stefan a traditional Scottish outfit is silly.
Oh, it is silly. Of course it's silly.
No, it's not. Come on.
I wore a kilt to my wedding and I felt like a fool the whole day. So I know what it's like. Just on the topic of Oktoberfest, though, I was also, funnily enough, drinking Oktoberfest beer the weekend because there's a big pub in Glasgow called the Bavarian Beer House, which, as you would expect, sells Munich beer. Interestingly enough, I have a friend who works there, and he was telling me that they actually have just about every Munich beer on tap. And he was telling me how unique that is, because obviously in Germany you can't really have Augustina with Löwenbräu or something like that, but they have just about all of them on tap, and he was saying it's one of the most unique places in Europe for it. But anyway, I had 2 or 3 what we call in the UK steins, which I have no idea where that came from. I don't know if you know, Matt, where that expression came from.
I was looking into it. I believe one theory is that obviously one word for like an old sort of stone or porcelain beer cup would be a Steinkrug, as in a stone cup. So maybe that's been weirdly shortened into Stein, but obviously Stein in German means stone. So there you go. There's a theory for you.
And Matt is right. That's where it's from.
Okay, there you go. Nailed it.
Nailed it.
I had 2 steins of one of Paulner and one of Löwenbräu. Thinking in typical kind of Oktoberfest fashion, it was the Oktoberfest versions which are stronger, and I only had 2 of them.
I can confirm that as well.
Yeah, they are stronger. For anyone for all the foreigners, like we don't feel the difference because we have like an automatic beer level in our bloodstream.
Well, I had 2 of those and then started feeling a little woozy, so I fell back onto a bottle of Rothaus, which you can never go wrong with.
Also a great shout.
Yeah,
and then I got a train home with my wife, and she was laughing at how drunk I was the whole way home. So it hit me hard.
So I have 2 Oktoberfest related stories. There's actually a beer garden in the Viktualienmarkt, which you probably know, Stefan, that they rotate the different taps. So every brewery gets like a turn at this beer garden to serve their beer. And when you arrive, you get like a sign, because like there is like this unification is Münchner Biere, so the Munich beers, right? They have like this kind of alliance. So that's the only other place I can think of where they can do this. Because other than that, it's like pretty much unknown to serve all beers. And then even then they don't do it at the same time, right? They rotate it. It's a rotating tap. But yeah, that's the only thing. But I had a huge FOMO for Oktoberfest this weekend, so I made an Oktoberfest chicken.
Was it wearing a lid, or was it?
No, it was not. That would be gross.
What's an Oktoberfest chicken? You have to explain this to us.
So you basically, you know how like they get it like perfectly tender, even though there's like the chicken just falls off the bone. So I looked up a few years ago how to make it. Actually was during COVID when I was really missing Oktoberfest, and you pre-boil it in a bunch of spices, and then you throw it in the oven at a really high temperature for just 15 minutes, and that's how they get it so tender.
Oh well, now I'm hungry.
Yeah. Anyway, Stefan, I think before we go to the ad, you have something to announce.
I think we should probably go to the ad first, and then I'll announce it afterwards.
This episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your number one information source for all sports wagering info with all the up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From week 1 all the way to college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we got that out of the way. Stefan, you have something to announce. Far more interesting than American football, I think.
Yeah, too much time spent talking about cooked chicken there.
But my fault.
Yeah, just to say for anyone who doesn't, follow us on Substack, to let you know that we are now launching a free newsletter alongside the paid ones that we do. It'll be coming out every Monday. It's called the Monday Bulletin, and it's a much shorter version of the typical newsletters we do, and it's just kind of something that we thought would be a good idea to kind of offer some kind of fun, fast bullet points, kind of hot takes, if you will, on the Bundesliga match day. And we're kind of hoping there'll be a place that people can kind of jump in on a Monday morning, see what we were talking about, give their thoughts in the comments below, and just continue to offer a place for Bundesliga fans to kind of chat about things, which, our subscribers already do so well in the forum. And God knows how many messages we had this weekend in the match day thread. It was into the hundreds by far. But so if you're interested, if you can't sign up for the paid version, that's absolutely fine. You can sign up for free, and it'll pop in your inbox every Monday morning.
Nice, more content. That's awesome. Looking forward to this. I think we're both still kind of hammering out the finer details of what this is going to look like, and I think we haven't really set it in stone, and it's probably not going to be set in stone forever anyways, right? This might change and be a little bit more fluid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's nothing set in stone at all. We'll kind of just go with the flow and see what people like, what they don't like, and then take it from there. But yeah, it's not going to be a long-winded thing. It's just hopefully something nice and easy that people can read on the train to work or something on a Monday morning. And then, yeah,
it should be fun. Speaking of fun, guys, who had VfB Stuttgart this high in the standings? Third. 1 point behind Bayern and Leverkusen on match day 5. Raise your hands. Virtually raise your hands. Matt, Stefan, did you have this on your bingo card? And adding to that, did you have it on your bingo card that Serhou Guirassy would be scoring 10 goals in 5 games?
Not gonna claim that I absolutely saw it coming or predicted it in the fashion that it's come about, but I'm pretty sure I did say at some point just after the relegation playoff last year. I thought that Stuttgart effectively wasted 3 or 4 months last season under Bruno Labbadia, and now we're finally seeing the full effect of what Sebastian Hoeneß has managed to do with a full pre-season behind him. Not sure would have predicted them scoring 17 goals in 5 games and Serhou Guirassy scoring 10 of them, including some absolute scorchers that he scored this weekend. But I definitely didn't see Stuttgart anywhere near the relegation battle, and probably not bottom half. And then if you combine that with the added European commitments that the likes of Frankfurt and Union and Freiburg have this season, and then add to that again the problems that Dortmund are having, then it actually adds up to quite a logical conclusion that they are where they are, and fair play to them. They're great to watch.
Yeah, I had them on my maybe top 6 list. Stefan.
Yeah, I think you did. Yeah, and I mean, as you both have said, like anyone who obviously watched the second half of the Bundesliga last year, as Stuttgart kind of began to, transition before our very eyes on the Hoeneß, then it was clear that they were going to pick up some big scalps this year. The manner in which they won that playoff, which we've talked about a few times now, was just men against boys. And it actually sparked a big debate, I think, we all had in terms of the actual fairness of the system of the playoffs, because it can lead to like one of these Bundesliga teams really kind of getting their house in order and having some sort of advantage over the team that are hoping to get promoted. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I did have some concerns over the players that they would sell, but I mean, there's no doubt that Stuttgart just already had more than enough players to kind of fill in, and I think that's kind of been the key thing. If you kind of look at that front three, yeah, Guirassy's kind of been the one who has stole the headlines. He's the one who's got the goals. I mean, his goals have been outstanding, but I think it was his first goal at the weekend where he just kind of hammers it home from the edge of the box. I think that's a good indication of what kind of form we're talking about here. Just about everything he hits has gone in so far, and you know, I'm not trying to downplay his performances or try to predict his downfall, but obviously the nature of a league season means that will obviously come down to that will fall slightly going forward. I mean, I think his XG is by far. I think his XG is only maybe like 3 or 4 right now, combined XG that is. So, but what really intrigues me, and this was definitely clear in the game at the weekend, was that he not only is a great goal scorer, he's also such a good target man. He's such great presence in the box. That first goal the Stuttgart scored was basically him playing his back to goal, like with his standing on the 6-yard line, and just having the presence to completely hold off the defender and set the ball up. And I think, you know, Hoeneß has obviously worked very hard over the summer. There was some concern of whether he'd actually stay at the club. I think he was heavily linked with a move to the Premier League, but they've obviously managed to do a lot to convince him to stay. And as a result, Stuttgart have had a degree of stability, at least in the forward line. I mean, obviously they lost quite a lot of players in defence. They lost Enzo as well in the middle of the park. Not Enzo, sorry, but midfielder. And it means that they've actually been able to, while the defence is maybe still not quite top 6 standard, in my opinion, the way that they were able to really pin Darmstadt back in that game, I just found it really fascinating. They look like a top 6 side. And I think the only thing else I'd really add to that is that if I was a Stuttgart fan, begin to wonder whether this is all pinned on Guirassy's goal scoring. All I would say is that one stat that I found really interesting is when I was looking at which players have completed the most dribbles so far this season, there's actually 3 Stuttgart players in the top 15. There's Enzo Milo, there's Chris Führig, who I thought was outstanding at the weekend, and of course Silas as well, who looks like he's kind of a second lease of life at Stuttgart after some difficult kind of seasons, obviously with the manner in which the troubles with his agent and such. So they are much more than just Guirassy. They're not a one-man team. They're not just one team with this big target man who they lump the ball up to. It's a really well-connected and well-built system, which goes all the way back to the fullbacks at times. I was absolutely amazed at just how much space guys like Stenzel managed to get and Ito managed to get as well on each flank against Darmstadt, and it was just a very complete performance. I could talk about it for about half an hour, but I'll take a breath and let someone else jump in here.
Before I give it over to Matt, I want to talk a bit about Guirassy, because I did write about him on Friday evening after the game. And you're right, Stefan, his shot of Bundesliga.com calls his shot efficiency, which is essentially how many more goals he has scored than his XG, and they have his XG is 5.3. XG ratings are different depending on what you use. They use AWS, of course, right? And they have him as 4.7 over his XG, which is fair enough. We all know that is going to regress to whatever the means are. Right now, the only other Bundesliga striker in history that has scored that many goals to start the season is a certain Robert Lewandowski, and he ended up breaking the Bundesliga goal scoring record that year. I think it's pretty realistic to say that that's not going to happen, right? But there's a few other numbers that can be both optimistic or concerning depending on how you see it. He's been directly involved in 65% of Stuttgart's goals this year. And I think that is also a really, really high number. But then Stuttgart themselves, Sebastian Hoeneß spoke after the match and pointed out how important he is, and underlining some of the things that you have said, not just in his goal scoring, but in the counter pressing, the way he moves, right, the way he creates space. Christian Führig is another player who really has stood out early on the season. Milot, you already mentioned, right? So I think, yes, he scores a lot of goals, and they're running a hot striker, which is, I think, when you have one, you need to do it, right? And so I think these are just some really interesting numbers here. And I guess, Matt, that is really the question then. We've kind of already alluded to it. I had them as a maybe top 6 team, but where is this going to end?
I mean, Stuttgart have a great deal of potential. I'm actually interested in listening to Stefan ticking off all the bullet points that I've written down. So I don't know if you've got like a camera in my flat, Stefan. I mean, yeah, not too much more to add. One bit I would have actually would be Angelo Stiller in midfield, who's actually surprised me. Although maybe when you consider his background coming through Bayern Munich's academy, perhaps less surprising the way that he's slotted into that role vacated by Enzo in centre mid. Really impressive. As I said, Stuttgart has a club of massive potential. They certainly see themselves that way. They certainly see the couple of years they've spent down in Division 2 as a bit of an abomination, and admittedly they've not helped themselves at boardroom level. I think we discussed this briefly last season, didn't we, about some of the various comings and goings and political intrigues surrounding VfB Stuttgart. But they seem, at least for the time being, to be on a more upward trajectory. Sebastian Hoeneß being given the time and the space and the backing to establish a clear plan on the pitch, while off it, you can see from the camera footage at games they're revamping the Mercedes-Benz arena. Speaking of Mercedes, there's also a bit of a revamp there. They're bringing on Porsche as well. There's been a sale of shares to them as well, so that's getting even more economic backing in from the surrounding area, which is one of the most economically powerful in Germany. So Stuttgart, we've made this point several times. Stuttgart can begin to harness that as a club in the way that Bayern Munich do so well, although admittedly in a different stratosphere. But in ways that the likes of Hamburg and Cologne and others don't, then there really is huge potential for VfB Stuttgart.
This is a really important point, Matt, and I want to hammer this home because I spoke to quite a few people at Stuttgart about this, and they have brought Porsche on board as well, right? I think it's one of the few clubs in Germany that has not one but two car makers. I know that's not true. Bayern has BMW and Audi. Obviously, BMW sponsoring the basketball team, but still they have both, right? But I think that is a really important point that you make here, because you have two massive car manufacturers now on board. Stuttgart is an economic area. There is so much economic power there, which is probably only rivaled by Bavaria or what's going in and around Munich, right? And I think one of the people that I spoke to last November when I was with them in the United States, that's one of the things that they pointed out. It's like, we haven't done enough to harness that economic power and get these sponsors on board and make Stuttgart not only a big team in Germany, but also take them abroad and say, look, we can go to US and there is Mercedes plants all over the place, and we haven't done enough of that. And I think it finally feels like they're kind of realizing that what they're sitting on.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, they of course run the risk that the more people you bring in, the more power you give to investors, sponsors, the more you kind of open yourself up to outside influences which aren't as positive. And precisely that happened to Stuttgart a few years ago, when they seemed to be on a similarly upward trajectory under that triumvirate of Pellegrino Matarazzo as coach, Sven Mislintat as sporting director, and Thomas Hitzelsberger as CEO of the football organisation. Added to that, a very popular club president in Klaus Vogt. that ended up completely imploding. The precise reasons for which are still aren't completely clear. But what we do know is that it culminated in Thomas Hitzelsberger attempting to become club president and company CEO in one, which is obviously not it's a lack of separation of powers in the club, which obviously went down very badly with the supporters, regardless of Thomas Hitzelsberger's sort of hero status around Stuttgart. Massive shame for all involved. And again, what actually convinced or encouraged Hitzelsberger to go along with that and go down that route is like I said, probably the aspect which is still unclear as to what exactly was at work there. But they certainly imploded. So it's good to see them recovering from that. I believe they're still without a sporting director, aren't they? Technically.
Well, their former sporting director just got fired.
I was going to say they're probably quite happy to have ended that particular partnership. Although, I mean, even at Stuttgart and beforehand at Dortmund, Sven Mislintat was absolutely known as a tricky character to work with, although he generally delivered results. Probably not the time or place to go into exactly what's gone wrong at Ajax, but it's certainly hit the fan, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd really add to that, and you guys did a really good job of kind of talking about the macroeconomics around the club, is that, I think Bundesliga fans of a certain vintage will think of Stuttgart as one of Germany's biggest clubs. They've also won the title, they challenged for it a few years as well in the kind of late noughties, early 90s. Talking about sponsors, I always feel like that Mercedes badge is just synonymous with the Stuttgart badge almost. When you can argue whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of capitalism and
sorry to
brands
interject,
in football.
but both Mercedes and Porsche, because isn't some of the Stuttgart badge also synonymous with the Porsche badge? I think there's certain elements that are the same.
I didn't really mean the badge itself. I mean, when I think of old Stuttgart tops, I always think of that kind of Mercedes badge on it.
Right.
I might be wrong. Maybe I'm confusing that with more newer versions in my head. But my point is that we always talk about people always ask, why is the Bundesliga only got one title challenger? And I think people abroad often think, was it because Bayern just buy all the best players? And then people like us have to go into this convoluted explanation as to why. It's probably more down to the fact that the clubs that should be challenging them have done their best to trip over their own feet over the last 10 or 15 years. And I put Stuttgart in that bracket alongside Schalke and alongside Borussia Dortmund, to a lesser extent, but still certainly there. And, I think all things considered, if Stuttgart's run properly, I think they are a top 4 or a top 6 club, to be perfectly honest with you. And that's what makes this moment so interesting, because you could maybe draw some parallels to Borussia Dortmund under Jurgen Klopp, which I know is a very lofty comparison, but just bear with me for a moment in the sense that obviously Klopp came in at a time when Dortmund had just kind of got back on their feet after basically financial annihilation. And he managed to take this kind of mid-table club and kind of raise them above their stature. And everyone got galvanised by this very impressive head coach who came out of nowhere. And, it's still very early days for Sebastian Hoeneß, obviously. And I know this comparison to Klopp's not doing him any favours, but it'd be really interesting to see if Stuttgart can be galvanised and kind of work everything around what Hoeneß wants to do with the club, because he's obviously a very talented head coach. I think he's probably one of the few German coaches of his kind of class and age who actually might be worth the buzz. And if you kind of look at that Stuttgart team, it's not really a side anymore that's full of exciting young players that will be picked off in the next 2 or 3 years. Guirassy's 28, 29, I think. Most of the forward players around him are in their mid-20s. It's not, these are all kind of just impressive Bundesliga players who perhaps haven't quite fulfilled their entire potential, and maybe something that Hoeneß can unlock. And therefore, we might find ourselves with a Stuttgart team that actually might be able to stick together for at least a season or two, which seems like a novel idea in the Bundesliga these days. And if so, and if Hoeneß continues to do what he's doing, then we might see a team that does kind of really start punching above its weight. And you never really know where that could go.
Just on that note, with Sebastian Hoeneß, one one aspect of his development, which I'd be quite interested to see, would be the extent to which he can maybe really begin to connect with Stuttgart as a club and really sort of start to engage with those unquantifiables, the emotions and the power of that fan base around the club. So it often seems with a lot of German coaches to be either one or the other. Either they fall into the bracket of what was in the past been disparagingly referred to as sort of nerdy tactical laptop coaches or whatever the phrase was, and those coaches who really seem to tend to thrive off the atmosphere and the emotion, but actually have little more to offer. Jurgen Klopp being one of the few who really bridged that gap as being tactically and technically absolutely top of his game, but also with the emotional connection to a club like Borussia Dortmund. Sebastian Hoeneß so far, he's come through obviously his first major job was in charge of Hoffenheim, I think, wasn't it? Again, not a club particularly known for having a particularly emotional environment. Stuttgart is on the other end of the scale, so it's all about getting that balance right. As far as I'm concerned, I really, really hope that they do, and I really hope that those two elements of the club, or the three elements of the club, I suppose, the powerful economic capitalist side of VfB Stuttgart in Baden-Württemberg, the emotional fan base on the other hand, and thirdly the technical prowess brought by Sebastian Hoeneß. If they can get those three working in tandem, there really is massive potential, particularly in the season, like I said before, when other top teams are either weakened either through fault of their own, perhaps in the case of Borussia Dortmund, or dealing with energy-sapping European campaigns in the case of Union, Freiburg and others.
I think that the fact that it's the name, isn't it? Hoeneß, football royalty. He is the son of Dieter Hoeneß, Uli Hoeneß's brother, right? Dieter Hoeneß, of course, played for VfB Stuttgart and was what we back then called the manager of VfB Stuttgart in the early 90s. We would now call that a sporting director, I guess. But I think that carries a lot of weight. And I think that helps someone like Hoeneß. Some people get hindered by that. It is almost like a weight on their shoulders that they have a name like that, right? But what fascinates me about Sebastian Hoeneß is that he kind of developed his career from the ground up, right? Of course, he worked at Bayern Munich, but we have to remember too, he was at the Hertha setup before that, right? Working there with Zehlendorf. Then he was in the Leipzig setup for quite some time as well as a youth coach and a manager of the academy. And then, of course, he went to Bayern Munich to work at the campus there. This is a guy who carries a big name. And I think that is, Matt, where I think the supporters maybe are able to... He can kind of bridge the gap from the supporters to the bosses, because it's different when a Hoeneß shows up to the bosses, right? And it's also different when you can say, well, my dad already played for the club.
Yeah, that is interesting. Although maybe it's just it's a matter of perspective. But obviously, everyone's aware of Hoeneß's family links, but just purely personally, I've watching Sebastian Hoeneß, I've actually never ever associated him with his father, or indeed his uncle, if I'm getting that right. And I think that's all credit to him. I think he's very much established his own reputation to the extent where, purely personally, I've actually never really made that direct connection. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's actually underlines my point, isn't it? What I mean is that he hasn't made it by himself, but you can still go to the bosses of the club and say, I think there is more of a respect there. And at the same time, he seems to have done it the right way. Silence. I guess that is approval.
That's agreement, Manu.
I thought that was for Matt. The only thing I'd add to this before maybe we should move on is just that as Matt says, I guess that is what he now has to do. He has to form a kind of strong bond with the Stuttgart fans in particular and the club itself, because he has bounced around a few clubs now, but this is now his first, with all due respect to Hoffenheim, this is now his first, top 6 team, shall we call it? Top 6 club. They're maybe not a top 6 team, but top
we're calling
6.
it that now. Okay, good.
No, I mean the club in terms of its size and support, I would say is a top 6 club in Germany. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the impression I've always had. I'm not saying the team is a top 6 team. I'm saying he's now at a top. He's now got a top job, shall we say, in Germany. And he, presumably this will be a long-term thing. And he'll hopefully do quite well with them. But he has to Matt's right. He has to form that bond with them, because we've seen very good head coaches kind of bounce around the Bundesliga for a long time, and they never really seem to get up to much. And there's maybe an interesting comparison here to Marco Rose, who had all the talent to succeed at Dortmund, but before he even started, he was on to hiding to nothing, as we would say, in terms of his relationship with the Dortmund fans and the manner in which he left Gladbach. So, he was never able to form that.
Having already burnt those bridges at Gladbach as well, is actually, he was actually another coach who I had down as one of those potential sort of post Klopp examples of a coach who combines those two qualities of being technically top of his game, but also having that connection to Germany's biggest football clubs, and ultimately failed a bit on that level.
Yeah, well, exactly, and I mean, he's obviously found his place at Leipzig, and that's a good fit, and that's a discussion for our day as to whether Leipzig's fans and him and blah blah blah. But I think that's what Hodes now has to do, isn't it? He has to prove that he can form that bond with Stuttgart, make something special off the pitch as well as on it, because obviously the club are crying out for someone to take some sort of leadership there, and he's done it on the pitch, so hopefully he can do it off it.
Yeah. No, I think he does. I mean, I was there for both the relegation playoff games. I've done a lot of games in Stuttgart because it's proximity to Munich, and I sense that this is a person who really knows what he's doing, with both feet on the ground. And I think has now experienced enough has experienced adversity as well, right? That Hoffenheim. I think we still all baffled on why it all went wrong at Hoffenheim, but that's probably a topic for another day. The one thing about Rose, and this is maybe a good transition to Dortmund, we want to talk about that next. We have to stop pretending that Klopp was always nice. Because he wasn't. I mean, and I still think that Dortmund and Marco Rose would have been a better combination long term than whatever this is. Which brings us to whatever this is, Matt. What's going on? They've won, but this episode of the Gegenpressing podcast is brought to you by BetOnline. Football is back, and BetOnline is your number one information source for all sports wagering. Info with all the up-to-minute stats, news, scores, and matchup breakdowns. Get the latest game odds, spreads, and totals from the NFL and college football at your fingertips with BetOnline's real-time updates on statistics, news, and odds. From Week 1 all the way to college football playoff and Super Bowl, BetOnline gives you access to the best football promotions and contests available anywhere online. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Remember to use our promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, BELIEVE, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Yeah, no, I think that sums it up. A big Dortmund sigh, basically. Really disappointing performance in the week away at PSG. Obviously, you can bring in mitigating factors as with the sheer quality that PSG have to offer. I mean, particularly if you're playing them away from home. But even so, Dortmund literally had, I think we did about 2 shots on goal that I can recall. One effort from Mal in the first half, and then it was a Jay Bino Gittins had an effort in the second half. And then they return into Bundesliga action against a Wolfsburg team who actually started the season really, really well. And I mean, the positive news of Borussia Dortmund is that they won, and that's absolutely fine. I mean, that was necessary. But and the performance was perhaps slightly improved on previous weeks, but still so many of the old issues were there. I thought they were still not as creative as you would want going forward. Once again, Daniel Mahlen aside. Admittedly, a really, really nice move for the for the goal, which I believe if Marco Reus doesn't tap in, Donny Mahlen has actually stood right behind him. So having started that move, he was almost on the end of finishing it himself anyway. So he's turning into a little bit of a one-man band at Dortmund, which is good to see because he also had a slow start last year. Marco Reus, I think we debated it a little bit, didn't we, on Saturday when we were discussing the game. Really uncertain as to what his role is now for Dortmund going forward. I thought he had a semi-okay game against Wolfsburg, but absolutely nothing to suggest that he should be starting every week in that midfield. I think it's very much as you were for Borussia Dortmund, and I do, despite the positive results, I don't think any of the other questions that we've raised surrounding Edin Terzic, Sebastian Kehl, and the recruitment policy, and the lack of creativity and defensive ideas going forward, I don't think any of that has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I made that point after the Champions League game, Stefan, that I think one of the biggest mistakes was that they didn't sign a replacement for Marco Reus in the summer. Obviously, everyone hoped Jude Bellingham could be eventually that replacement. That's we discussed that, but it's games like that kind of highlighted, right, that they still have to card out poor Marco Reus and be the difference maker here, week after week.
There have been a couple of little flashes from Felix Metscher, in fairness, in that Jude Bellingham role. Again, I'm not claiming at this point that he's replacing Jude Bellingham there 1-for-1. He's absolutely not. But there have been attempts to, in terms of winning the ball in midfield, driving forward, showing some sort of urge to penetrate and inject pace through the centre of midfield. So I think that's worth mentioning, and that's to his credit. But still nowhere near on the level they had with Bellingham, but no one is at the moment.
Yeah, I think about. Let me try and speak properly here. I think reintroducing Reus into this team was actually quite an interesting move from Terzic, because they have obviously been really lacking someone who can play off the striker. We talked about recently the Marouane Adeyemi and Daniel Mahlen had struggled to really create any kind of form for Dortmund. Obviously, Mahlen has kind of came on leaps and bounds since then. I think the jury's still out for Adeyemi, in my opinion. I think the hope that Julian Brandt could have played that number 10 role hasn't really worked out, because that's just not the kind of playmaker he is. He can create goals, he can kind of pick the passes, he can pull the strings, but he does that in a far more discreet way. He likes to drift out wide, he likes to kind of drop into pockets, he likes to kind of just roam around the pitch, whereas someone like Reus is just far more direct. He's very much like, when I get the ball, I'm looking to Füllkrug and I want to play a 1-2. And that's basically all he ever tries to do. It's 1-2s, 1-2s, 1-2s. And that's sometimes exactly what Dortmund need. And I actually found myself watching the game thinking, it wasn't a classic performance by any means, but I thought there was a bit more structure to this Dortmund team, because it felt like they're a lot more simplified. It was, try and get the ball to Reus, or try and get the ball to Füllkrug, or, more often than not, actually get the ball to Bino Gittins, who was actually keeping some semblance of width about the team. I actually thought he did quite well in that regard, and I think it kind of meant that while Dortmund didn't create a lot of chances, it felt like they were doing it. It's almost like they actually knew what they were doing for a change. They just weren't doing it well enough, perhaps. But the last kind of couple of games, you couldn't even really figure out what they were trying to do. For example, in that PSG game. Now I know PSG are a very different opponent to Wolfsburg, but there was just no real idea how Dortmund were even trying to attack with the ball. Even if everyone's playing well, you just don't know how they'd link up that well. Whereas with Füllkrug playing as a target man, with Reus playing off him, Bino Gittins playing as an out-and-out winger, you kind of got the idea, like, right, these guys at least know where to stand, their opponent, their teammates know where to play the ball to them, and it felt more structured to me. Another thing that really fascinated me was that obviously Özcan steps in for Emre Can here, And as far as I could tell, there was no notable difference or drop-off in performance from Dortmund's midfield. And I find this so fascinating because it's something that I tweeted about during the summer, and I think it's something that most Dortmund fans saw coming a mile away, where there was all this kind of hubbub over signing our defensive midfielder or signing a midfield enforcer, and they were also going to pick up Alvarez from Ajax,
which, by the way, got vetoed by Terzic.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden Emre Can gets a new contract and the captaincy, and then everyone knew what was happening here.
Underlined by Terzic.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interjecting here, but these are just want to bring in these facts because they're important.
Yeah, they added the context, but you knew fine well that this was Terzic saying, right, instead of trying to put together a comprehensive plan to replace Jude Bellingham, I'm just going to double down on Emre Can. And I think Can had a good role last year. I think he kind of fitted into a system that works him well, where he kind of slots in as almost like a kind of third central defender, but it just hasn't worked this year because he's been asked to kind of play as he sorted it as a third central defender, but this season he's always been asked to play as a central midfielder again, and I've not really been impressed with him at all. I thought he was completely anonymous against PSG, and then all of a sudden Terzic starts Nemcha and Ozcan in the middle of the park, and there's maybe a number of reasons why the two of them did okay there. Wolfsburg just seemed to give up at halftime. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but they both looked quite comfortable in the middle of the park, and I think that's quite encouraging for Dortmund because, I think they do. I think that midfield, the middle of the park is where the issues probably start in this team, and I don't think Emre Can's a solution.
I think Emre Can is someone who needs someone like Bellingham next to him to really shine, and that's obviously not happening because Jude Bellingham is at Real Madrid shooting out the lights. But Matt, I have a question for you, because we've talked a lot about Edin Terzic, right, and his role, and how he's almost like a cheerleader, and he's so beloved by the officials at the club, and you spend a lot of time with the fans at Dortmund. How do they see him?
In a word, they all love him as a coach, or at least as a figurehead, as a person. They consider him a hero. He's seen as one of them, and I don't think that'll ever change. Again, rather than personal experience, I've also always enjoyed working with him, asking questions, discussing things with him. I think he comes across extremely well. However, this season I have heard murmurings among the fan base that there's a growing acceptance that he's potentially not the coach which is going to offer Dortmund the sort of quality they're after when it comes to actually winning the Bundesliga title. Obviously it's all in hindsight now, and it's all hypothetical now, but maybe things would have been different had they actually managed to win the Bundesliga last season on the final day and then take that step up. But the fact is they didn't, and when you do that opens up the door for doubts to grow. So I think as a person, as a figurehead, I don't think he'll ever lose that status within the fan base. But I do get the impression that when it comes purely technically as a coach, there are absolutely doubts. Having said that, I was going to reiterate one thing that Stefan touched on there, and that was the way he's managed Jamie Bynoe-Gittens over the past couple of years. There's clearly a great deal of trust between the two of them. I think Terzic's management of Bynoe-Gittens, to first of all, as in being a young foreign kid at such a big club, and that's been managed really well. And also the two shoulder injuries that he's had to deal with. Terzic has managed the situation really well. He's always spoke positively of him. They clearly have a good relationship. Terzic brought him on as a substitute on several occasions last season and was rewarded for that. But finally, with a couple of key goals off the bench. I was really happy to see him starting against Wolfsburg. And I mean, it sounds daft to say that maybe he's a bit more fortunate to be taken off, given that his replacement, Antonio Marlon, really did make a difference in terms of setting up and creating the winning goal. But Bino Gittins in the first half was, as Stefan was saying, offering permanent width, constantly running at plays. Every time he gets the ball, he runs at defenders, cutting inside, getting shots away. I spoke to Terzic Palace on a couple of occasions last season. He's always championed those qualities that Jamie Bino Gittins has. So I was happy to see him starting. He's only just turned 19. He's still a kid, got a long way ahead of him. But that was definitely a positive aspect for Dortmund at the weekend.
Yeah, can I just jump in one more thing, Manu? It's just this kind of running theory that I'm kind of piecing together with Terzic is that I do kind of wonder if he's actually more comfortable playing defensive football and setting his team up to play defensively, because, we talk a lot about how Terzic is this kind of, this Dortmund born and bred, and how he was at the youth team when Klopp was at the club, and how he bleeds black and yellow and things like that. But I think actually one of the more formative kind of moments of his career was actually when he was a kind of understudy to Slaven Bilic, who is a far more pragmatic manager. He can be playing defensive football, but he's also kind of one of these kind of managers who relies a lot on how he motivates players rather than the tactics itself. He's very, at least for my personal reflection on Bilic's coaching career, he seems to focus a lot more on, motivating players, rotating the squad when he has to, and at times he can set his teams up very defensively and reactionary to the opponents he's facing. And I always find it really interesting whenever Dortmund play in the Champions League under Terzic, he's always been so quick to build these kind of very defensive structures and almost counter-attacking structures. And, I know things that work out at PSG in the midweek, but in that first half, the way that Dortmund play that very defensive football, I did kind of watch that game thinking, is this actually what Terzic's ideal style of football is? Because I don't mean in a disparaging way. I actually think there's a lot to be said for defensive football. It's something that Manu and I bicker about constantly, because I think there's not enough defensive coaches in German football. But, obviously he can't really do that as Dortmund head coach, because you're expected to win games and you're expected to take the game to opponents week in, week out as the, the second or third richest club in the country. But I don't know, there's something that makes me wonder if maybe, it's not so much that Terzic doesn't know what he's doing or he doesn't have the tactical acumen to do these things. It's just that he's far more comfortable playing defensive football. And that might explain why this team really struggled to, they really struggle to be creative. They really struggle to break teams down. They struggle to dominate teams and hold possession. And, I'm just trying to think back to what the kind of cornerstones that Dortmund team were last season. And I think, the end of January, or January onwards, there was a lot of focus on the fact that Sebastian Haller was in, and that kind of unlocked Adeyemi and Daniel Malin and things. But I think another key thing was that they looked far more defensively solid for a change, and that's kind of maybe what was behind that success. And maybe that's what Terzic actually is far more comfortable dealing with, and that's maybe why they're not so good in attack this season.
Mm. But Stefan, you can play defensive football at Dortmund and be loved. Ottmar Hitzfeld comes to mind. He was obviously towards the end of his Bayern career ostracized by Karl-Heinz Rummenigge, who called him a mathematician, right? Because he was playing too pragmatic a style of football that wasn't fashionable enough for Bayern Munich at the time. But his original success with Dortmund was playing pragmatic football and won them a Champions League, right? And the first year that Klopp won the title with Borussia Dortmund, everyone talked about how exciting that team was, but it broke a record for the least amount of goals scored against in the Bundesliga.
Hummels and Subotic.
Yeah. So,
well, then why don't we throw this to Matt? Matt, what do you think? Do you think Terzic has to start playing Route 1 defensive Sam Allardyce football, and do you think the yellow wall would accept that?
I don't even think it's a case of whether a yellow wall would accept that. I think it's too simple. I think ultimately, like any fans, will accept anything that wins them games. And I think it's a valid point that maybe Terzic does feel more comfortable playing defensive football, but ultimately that's not going to win. It's not going to win the league, whether he's comfortable with that or not. Like you said, Dortmund are in that position where they do have the ball against the majority of Bundesliga opposition. What they like, aren't they? And yeah.
Okay, can I counter that real quick though, Matt? Because they lost the league because they got scored on 3 times by Stuttgart last year.
which suggests that the defensive acumen that Stefan's has been praising perhaps wasn't quite there.
Yeah. What I mean by that is, I do think that, Stefan and I, we have this argument all about the defensive football, but I do think I fundamentally agree with you that defense has to be the foundation of everything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, yeah. There's no you simply can't win titles by just outscoring other opponents. I think even Bayern are well aware of that, and it's an issue that highlights itself particularly well in the Champions League for German teams, where maybe they can kind of get by week to week, but when they play in the Champions League, it does begin to fall apart. So I think this all just kind of goes to say that Dortmund are obviously, they're not out of the woods yet. I'd actually kind of walked away from that game against Wolfsburg kind of just with a shrug of the shoulders, and I thought, fair enough, that's a decent 3 points for Dortmund. I expected them to drop points in this game. I expected Wolfsburg to actually be far more cutting edge and actually offer a lot more attack. And maybe that's also maybe something the Dortmund were actually more than happy to kind of counter, where they played a team that were actually maybe able to kind of throw a bit more at them. But I don't know, it's an interesting one. I think this all just goes to say that despite how many, I mean, I don't know how many games Terzic has now coached for Dortmund, but it's now been we're now in our third full season with him, perhaps. Maybe not full seasons, but we're not far off that. And if anyone was to ask any three of us what is Edin Terzic football, I'm not sure any of us could give a comprehensive answer.
No, I can't. Can you, Matt?
No, I can't. I can't really. That's why I said at the start of this segment, it's very much as you were for Dortmund. I think, like Stefan said, it's a good result, but I think all the old questions are still there, and I suspect that by Christmas and then the end of the Champions League group stage at the latest, we'll know whether the progress made under Terzic has been acceptable and has been good enough or not, because a decision will have been made by then.
Yeah. Well, good thing Vaska now has Julian Nagelsmann's mobile number.
I mean, we're getting it's a different topic, isn't it? But it genuinely did surprise me a little bit, and that is absolutely without wanting to get into any sort of conspiracies. And just for anyone listening who's maybe not quite aware of the personnel crossovers there, Hans-Joachim Watzke is not only the CEO of Borussia Dortmund, he's also the, I believe, vice chair of the DFB's supervisory board. Have I got that right?
You got that right.
Well, he's a
vice president.
He's one of the few people still on the board, which I think is probably most important.
So that board has been dissolved. There's lots of boards. We all work for German companies. You know how it works, Stefan.
But the point being that either way, he, as much as he was all, I mean, Nagelsmann was obviously also identified by Rudi Völler at the DFB as being a number one candidate. However, Watzke did absolutely sign it off. He might not have been directly involved for the whole thing, but certainly said yes. It did surprise me, Vic, because there's no suggestion that there are any concrete considerations around Dortmund to get rid of Edin Terzic at this stage. It's probably more media speculation than anything, but the name Julian Nagelsmann had absolutely been whispered around Dortmund. That spectre is out the way, at least for the time being, as far as Terzic is concerned. But only for 7-8 months, and I suspect that international football. While I mean, it's a different topic. While I think that it's actually a really, really, really good move from the DFB and from Germany, I think Nagelsmann is a breath of fresh air and a generational change that they absolutely need. But that's a different topic. I don't think he'll be there beyond the Euros. Whatever happens, it would certainly surprise me. I think Julian Nagelsmann I think he's a club coach, and I think he's one of the best club coaches out there. And I would personally like to see him back in club football, doing a proper job as soon as possible. And it'd be interesting to see how that works out. Regarding Borussia Dortmund by that point.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating just because you mentioned, obviously Nagelsmann's only sticking with Germany until the Euros, and it's the thing is that Watzke obviously informally will know fine well whether Nagelsmann has any interest in becoming a Dortmund head coach in the future. I'm trying to word this carefully here, because I'm not suggesting that Watzke is tapping up Nagelsmann by any means, but what I'm saying is that if things aren't going well at Dortmund through the season and the question marks remain over Terzic, I find it impossible to believe that Watzke isn't maybe just kind of standing by the water cooler TFB waiting for Nagelsmann to walk by and just to kind of pick his thoughts over things. And I'm sure Nagelsmann would probably make it clear whether that's something he would be interested in or something he absolutely would not be interested in. And we then find ourselves in an almost ironic situation where Dortmund could have a head coach in waiting to replace Terzic, the same way that Terzic was the head coach in waiting to replace Rose.
There's no conflict of interest here, of course, right? Watzke being in both those positions.
Yeah, well, exactly. And there was no conflict of interest in Terzic being whatever the hell he was at the club. But it's a weird way. I mean, look, we are kind of entirely speculating here, which is probably a good sign to wrap this up, because we're moving into we might as well get a cue ball out, or whatever they're called, and shake to get an answer out of an 8-ball cube.
Lots of people have asked these questions, so I think we're just reiterating what's out there already.
Yeah, well, if Dortmund keep winning boring 1-0s, then I'm sure Terzic will still be in the job.
Well, yeah, because then they win the title. I mean, it's pretty safe to...
Or they'll lose it on goal difference to Stuttgart.
or Bayern, because their opponents roll over. We didn't even have time to talk about that. It's been a very heavy Stuttgart and Dortmund podcast, which actually, you know what, fair enough, because we have talked about Bayern and Leverkusen and Leipzig to a lot this season already, and there's bonus shows and previews and all that kind of stuff. So listen, there's more content coming about those teams as well, so don't be worry. We have them on the radar. Matt, it's been great having you on. Where can people find you?
Been great being here. As always, I'm on Twitter or X, Y, Z, whatever it's called these days, at Matt_4D. Piece on there if people are interested. I've done a piece over the weekend about Justin and Jinma at Werder Bremen. Also on loan at Borussia Dortmund, their reserve team piece for the past couple of seasons, and he's already scored 2 goals this season for Bremen. Exciting young player. He scored goals at every level of his career so far. Division 4, Division 3. And now, in no time at all, seemingly having no problem taking to Bundesliga football, albeit just off the bench so far. But in his performances so far, he's he certainly caused Cologne huge problems with his pace off the bench. He scored with his second touch, his first being a touch to take him into the box and leave poor Jeff Chabot, the Cologne centre back, leave him absolutely for dead. Exciting player, and hopefully lots more to come from him at Bremen.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah, go check that out. As always, the show is brought to you by BetOnline. Stefan, any final thoughts before we wrap this up completely?
No. Always great to have Matt on. Always great to have another, point of view. And yeah, we didn't talk about Bayern, but you know what? We always talk about Bayern, so I'm sure listeners won't mind.
There will be a bonus show, and there's German Cup games and all that sort of stuff. So don't worry. There's more coming. Also, little note, my newsletter coming out first this week, Stefan's second. Just a reverse, simply because I was able to speak to Benjamin Sesko today. It's a round table, and there is some cool stuff in that conversation that you'll find on the homepage for subscribers only. All right, we'll be back soon. Until then, auf Wiedersehen.
Kein Ende in Sicht.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.